All right, thank you, Dutton, and thank you, Alan, for hosting me on the UXPA Seattle meetup. And welcome everyone, and thanks for joining. So I'm going to jump right in. So let me tell you a story. Not long ago, my son graduated from high school. Now, for those of you who've had a 12th grader before, then you know that it's kind of hell because you have to deal with college applications, test scores, GPAs, worrying about your finances if they actually get into a college, and then the rejections pouring in, and then hopefully an acceptance. And that's what we went through. And ultimately, my son got accepted just at the very end of high school to UC Santa Cruz. And so it was a big change for us. He was moving away, and now it was time that I could move on with my life. I was finally an empty nester, and I could move to the city that I had always wanted to live in, which is Berlin. That's where I am now. I've always loved Berlin. I first came here actually in 1986. I stayed in a Dachgeschoss, which is an attic apartment in an area called Schöneberg, which was in West Berlin, which is where you had to stay when you came back in the 80s. I really liked it. I liked then and especially now, the experimental music scene, the art scene. I came here for love, but I also really enjoy so many aspects of Berlin. But ultimately, when I landed, I just had a sublet apartment, and it was rough. I didn't have a mailbox. I didn't have an address to register for a visa. I just felt very much like a second-class citizen. So I said, I'm going to look for a flat in Berlin, and a registered flat that I could keep forever once I get it. And that was when I hit a wall. No, not that wall, this wall. The wall of the apartment shortage in Berlin, the wall of so many people wanting to move here because it is a cheaper place to live in the world, and certainly in Europe. A place where a lot of refugees came, especially right after the Ukraine war started. And so prices started soaring, and any sort of long-term apartment that started really becoming something that was almost impossible to find. And so I was faced with a wicked problem. And so I decided, well, I'm a strategist. Why don't I apply my own discovery phase process to my problem of finding a flat in Berlin? So with discovery, just thinking about like the concept of discovery, it's the act of finding out or learning something for the first time. That's how scientists think of it. Now, in the legal profession, it's about collecting evidence. You're trying to gather as much evidence as possible to win a case, and so that you're not surprised when the other side comes and says, oh, by the way, you already have an argument for that. And so the discovery phase in UX strategy or UX design is similar to that in terms of collecting evidence, and it also has a process. It's a preliminary phase that involves researching the problem, framing the problem that you need to solve, and then gathering enough evidence and initial direction on what to do next. It starts with the problem space, discover, define. I'm sure you've seen this double diamond before, and moves into the solution space, deliver, develop, and deliver. So let's talk about the problem space for a minute. So the problem space is where the needs of your target customer live. These can be anything from pain points, desires. You can frame them as jobs to be done. To me, they define market segments. When we're thinking about like who is suffering the most from this problem, we're not looking for just a minor headache. We're looking for migraine problems. And so the big problem I had was I was in Berlin, and when I was trying to look for flats, there was nothing available. Now, the solution space is where the focus shifts to ideation, prototyping, and iteration. And this phase is a lot more fun, and it's all about leveraging creativity and innovation to generate potential solutions, rapidly test them out, and refine them based on real-world feedback. So I said, what's my problem? What's my problem statement? We want to start by really distilling any problem that we're attacking in real life or in product strategy down to as few words as possible. So for me, newcomers and current residents of Berlin, right? That first statement there is loaded with our segment. So it's the new people like myself to the people who are here. Let's say somebody wants to get married and start a family, they need a bigger apartment, so it's, I identified two groups of people in the first part. That's our provisional persona, who are having a hard time. What are they having a hard time with? Finding a flat with an unlimited lease. And then you can make a hypothesis on why, due to a massive housing shortage. So once you have your problem statement, you can move into your discovery phase. And there's many, many, many techniques, just like we have with UX design, where you have all these tools in the tool belt, same with the discovery phase. And I'm going to talk about a few of them. We've got stakeholder interviews. We've got customer interviews. We've got ideation workshops. We've got competitive research, and then doing prototype experiments. So let's start with stakeholder interviews. This is pretty much when we're at the beginning of our process and we need to go talk to the C-suite. We're either, inside of an organization, our own organization, or we're working at an agency and we need to go talk to the client. We're part of a startup, but we need to really understand from our founders what the heck they're thinking about. We need to prepare, we need to have our questions, and we need to have a systematic process for doing this. The stakeholders are the keepers of this crucial intel, right? And this is what we're going to base our hypotheses on. And so we want to get these insights about how the company runs. What are the typical workflows? What's happening behind the scenes, the backstage operations? And who are the customers who rely, on these stakeholders? And so we're trying to learn all these things. By engaging the stakeholders in interview, we can unlock a treasure trove of knowledge that adds depth and clarity to the team's understanding, ensuring that every decision rooted in both strategic and operational realities. So let's talk about the do's and the don'ts. Do prepare for the interviews by getting domain expertise. You don't want to go in there and ask them Googleable questions. You want to ask them things that you can't figure out, that you can't validate using ChatGPT. Do not interview your stakeholders in groups. You don't want the, let's say, highest paid person in the room to bias the others. You want to give them each a chance to share their insights with you individually. Do research the stakeholders themselves on LinkedIn and Google to know their background, so you're familiar with them. Perhaps you went to the same college and you could say, hey, I noticed when I was learning about you that we have the same alma mater. That might break the ice. Don't waste their time asking these Googleable questions. Ask questions that help you understand their business model or their perspective on how the business works, how their perspective on what makes the business successful and what are all the challenges and pitfalls. Don't share what other stakeholders told you, because they're going to think you're going to do the same. Right now, you're trying to get information out of them without biasing them. Build camaraderie. Find ways to to build trust. The stakeholder interviews is a really great opportunity for them to start understanding that you really understand their business. So when you start presenting your concepts later, you have a better chance of getting buy-in. Don't ask too many closed-ended questions. We all know this from our user research backgrounds. Do identify goals, expectations, opportunities for innovation and challenges, and don't interrupt. If you have to, learn how to do it politely. You may collect all of your stakeholder interview, you might have recordings, you might be dumping them into, Notebook LLM. However, you're collecting the data. Ultimately, you need to have an organized process for doing things like thematic analysis. I still do things in a FigJam board or a Miro board and, really check, my categories, my topic, my insights against whatever I might be getting out of an LLM. And ultimately, you really want to like distill this down in a very organized way so that you could then play it back to them based on themes. Here's what I heard were the business objectives. Here's what I heard is the vision of the company. Now I heard a couple of different things, and I'm trying to figure out which is really, the most single objective. And so this is a way to really, have a conversation with them and get them all on the same page. Because if you don't, and then you go into the next part of the process and they're all thinking different things, well, it's going to be really hard to get buy-in because they haven't agreed even on what the business objectives are. So for my flat hunt, who was the stakeholder? Yeah, you're right. It was me. I asked myself, what are the deal breakers? What do I absolutely want? I knew I wanted it in Schöneberg. I knew it had to have a bedroom and an office. I knew it had to be a certain size, a balcony, and not a fifth floor walk up, which I had been living in it. And, I wanted some place I could grow old in. Competitive research. So this is all about really understanding our current marketplace, how big it is, who the competitors are, who's really owning the space, and doing this research in a very systematic fashion. I teach this in depth in my Maven course, especially how to leverage AI and LLMs for doing this in a very responsible way, because you can see incredible amounts of garbage if you just trust AI to do this for you. So really, it starts with understanding who are your direct competitors, who are your indirect competitors. Do not focus on only the usability of the product. If we're strategists, we're focusing on value propositions, business models. We are trying to capture qualitative and quantitative data points to benchmark UX and business-centric attributes. Do not go down rabbit holes, focusing disproportionately across the landscape. You need to really time box your time. I'm going to spend one day looking at these guys, the next day looking at these other ones. You have to get good at distilling large mounds of data into actionable competitive intelligence. You do not want to aggregate your data in a disorganized way. Garbage in equals garbage out. You want to know how to present your findings using storytelling and visual imagery. Do not submit your research without giving context to how things are relevant to the value proposition. Do take a stand on the direction the product needs to go. Do not end your product strategy dissertation without, hey, this is what I think we should be doing. And don't just like summarize it and say, yeah, we need to optimize the UX, or we need to have, AI. That's going to solve everything. We're really looking for bigger ideas at this point. As far as the output, you might be doing your research inside of a spreadsheet, but ultimately you're going to have to play that back as well and present it in a way that's easy for them to understand, where you're constantly like showing each competitor with a similar template. Here's the value prop, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's how much financing they have. You want to have this really lovely mix of both qualitative and quantitative data points to show to them. So for my competitive research, who were my competitors for my flat hunt? Well, they were the other people looking for flats, obviously, and I could learn about them by looking at the flyers all over the city. I knew I was like going against these big families who were probably looking for larger flats, people with really low budgets and big dreams, people, new moms with loud babies, or like the, psychiatrists, that they definitely look like a tough couple to beat. They work for the state, so people love that. You can look at, if you're going to say, I'm going to go out and advertise myself, like, what are people saying about themselves? How are they presenting themselves? I mean, this guy was pretty funny. He'd like searching, ich bin nett. You guys know what ich bin nett is? Well, it says it right there. I am nice. It's like, okay, interesting. And he's going really old school with the pull-off tabs. All right. So I knew it was going to be a tough fight because there was college kids and therapist couples and families and really everybody desperately looking for a flat at the same time as me. So that's why we want to have ideation workshops. This is where the brainstorming comes in. We want to work with our teams, either on site or in person, and really try to get everybody's ideas together so we can understand the different perspectives. So when I run these workshops, whether they're with few people or a large group of people, I do so in a very systematic way. These ideation workshops should be collaborative. They're where our teams can generate creative ideas and solutions around a specific problem or opportunity. So we need to set the stage. This is the problem we're trying to solve. We need to really understand, what we're going to do throughout this workshop. These workshops can foster innovation through brainstorming, discussions, group exercises, ensuring diverse perspectives and a wide range of potential solutions. They're all explored. So first pinpoint the workshop goals and a successful outcome. When you're starting, if you get assigned to do it or you're running it, with a few people, say, here's what needs to be the outcome. Here's what success looks like. Do not spend more than 5 minutes on an icebreaker activity. Most people know how to use these collaborative, Miro, FigJam, whatever boards. The icebreaker is really only necessary if you're trying to get people who have never met each other to do something quick and fun that's not ridiculous. Do identify the right people who need to be in the room. And the ones who are critical, send hold invites for way ahead of time. Do not use FigJam, Miro canned templates with zero customization. That's like what a lame hack would do. You can look at them and say, okay, but mostly you're going to have to do something custom. Do work up an agenda with time box activities that will achieve these goals. Do know that you probably won't get through half of it. Don't improvise because you've done this a million times. You still need to rehearse your workshop with your team or a partner. You want to make sure it flows correctly. You want to make sure as you step through each activity that they're going to all lead, through a process, that one will give you the output to the next one. And that there's enough time to do that and people understand why they're doing it and that you're trying to get everybody to participate. Do not let them focus on just one solution. You're trying to come up with many ideas. Run the workshop using timers with lots of voting while documenting everything. And don't forget to send a readout summarizing what happened with next steps. Don't just say, hey, here's our workshop FigJam board. You can check it out. I take mine, I drop it into, PowerPoint, and I write up a little piece about here's what we learned. Here's what summary. You want there to be some kind of takeaway or something besides just a recording to bring people up to speed. So I had to have an ideation workshop with my girls who I knew in Berlin to help me come up with different ideas, as the months started ticking by and the person who I was subletting from was threatening to kick me out. So we came up with all kinds of different ideas on how I could look for a flat, and these ideas were tactics. A whole different ideas, nothing got ruled out. So then came the customer interviews. These are about finally getting to meet the end users of what you're building, your product or service. And these may be a customer who pays or doesn't pay. These could be an employee. But you really need to understand what they're trying to do with, the software or the service to really make sure that it's obviously going to be geared toward them. And so we want to have these conversations with the current or potential users to gather qualitative insights about their needs, behaviors, and pain points. These help businesses validate assumptions, uncover opportunities, and inform product or service design with a deeper understanding of the customer perspective. So find customers who match provisional, proto-persona, whatever you want to call it. They really help drive your questions. So ultimately, you can really understand the customer segment more completely. Don't recruit participants that don't pass the screener. You need to get the right people to talk to. Do ask questions that will validate or invalidate your problem statement and personas. I teach very much in my I teach in my course how to use the proto-personas to actually develop a customer interview framework. So to me, creating these interviews and validating these personas is really just a math problem. Do not ask leading or only close-ended questions. Do rehearse your intro and questions with a pilot study to ensure it flows. Test your timing. Do not feel that you need to read your interview script verbatim. Do record the interviews now, obviously. It's easier than ever, so you can focus on engaging with each participant. Don't interview more than 5 without evaluating to see if you're seeing patterns and need to pivot on something. Do create a readout that documents the major findings and takeaways, and don't interrupt without saying, sorry for interrupting, but. Once again, I try to create, readouts that are very clean. I constantly replay, I'll play back, the goals of what we were trying to, accomplish with the study, and have slides for each person that I interviewed that really sums up kind of at a high level who they are and has takeaways, and ultimately ends with, an analysis. So who are my customers in my flat hunt case study? Well, I guess my customers are the people who have the flats. They're the ones that I need something from. They're the ones who are renting it. And so how was I going to find out who they were, besides like the few that were listed on the real estate site? So what I did is I waited for someone to leave a building, and then I would run in and take a photo of the information on the building and started building up my own little database. You have to really go old school here in Germany with these things. And so then I crafted, the perfect email that I could send to them directly saying, here's my stuff. Here's what I'm looking for. Please write me back. That was my plan. I wanted to really have a chance to get in front of them. Prototype experiments, probably my favorite. So with prototypes, we really want to show something that is as close to what the real product is going to do, that helps the customer visualize what it's going to deliver to them, that's going to make them so happy. It involves presenting the concept of the product to your target customers to gauge its appeal and viability before building it out. It's a critical step for uncovering strengths, addressing weaknesses, and validating whether the concept is even something that they want. So do something to concierge the experience. Think hard. What are the key moments that they really need to see to get this thing? Don't think a low fidelity prototype will actually work. This idea like, oh, they'll just imagine it. It's better. We think, lo-fi is better because, then they're not too focused on like that it's the real solution. Well, then they may not even get what that real solution is. We're not testing design here. We want them to get what the concept is. Start with the storyboard to articulate the concept for alignment. Don't let your designers build a prototype without a script or a storyboard or an outline. Who knows what they'll build? They might build the entire experience. That's not what we're testing. Do write a prototype script that focuses on the value proposition. Don't build a prototype that's fully functional. This isn't the 80s. Do fine-tune the prototype so it flows from the problem statement to the value proposition. Don't put the prototype in front of participants without a discussion guide. Once again, we need to really prepare what we're going to ask them and make sure that our questions are aligned with trying to validate our hypotheses about the product, trying to validate the business model. We're doing, business concept testing. That's what I'm proposing here. Test a prototype on 5 participants, see what you learn, then rinse, repeat. Don't burn your time, money, and effort on a product that has not been tested and validated on target customers. And so once you get your prototype, you can test them in person. Nowadays, we're testing them online, of course. And ultimately, you'll have another readout, brief that's going to sum up what you learned in a way that's visual, that uses numbers and percentages, so that people can understand, what you validated and what your key insights were. So I had to do prototypes too for my flat case study, because what if I just like put up a flyer and nothing happened? How do I know if it's because nobody cared about my flyer or because my flyer was bad? So I said, I'm going to make a bunch of different flyers. I had ones that were both in English and in German, real simple. The rain came and didn't get very many calls. Nobody was peeling off the number, and, that just wasn't really working, even with the QR code. So I did another one. This time, I getting more desperate, I thought, I'm going to offer a reward, really put that QR code in front of them, make it really simple for them to see, and be a bit more systematic about it. I said, I'm just going to cover this particular neighborhood, just make sure I hit every little street in this little block. And then I got the mustache too. So I kept moving, trying different prototypes, trying different areas, really ramping it up. On this one, I got Karl Marx in it. Now I'm going to drop them into Rote Insel, which is this famously former commie area of Berlin. I thought that could be amusing. Put that up there. And at this point, it was really about waiting and just resilience. I littered over 500 flyers all over Berlin, trying to get a flat. And so these were my tactics. I went through so many of them. Tactic 1 was to go with what everybody did with a premium account on a real estate site. You update all of the information that I made a bunch of money. Here's all the proof of identity. So they had everything. But I would go to their website, I'd click what I would want it. And at the very end, by the time I saw the apartment that was for rent, so had 1,186 people. That's a lot of people competing for a flat. And I'm seeing it last, or not even last at that point in the process. So I was trying many things. I thought, let me go visit this flyer. I looked at these ones. I thought, oh, that one's nice and simple. And I thought about this guy. I said, I'm going to make a super flyer. Now, people wouldn't necessarily describe me as the nicest person. They might say I'm funny. They might say I know a lot about UX. But for the purpose of getting a flat, I was all over it. I'm like, I am nice. I really wanted that flat. I had a picture of a beer. I raised the the reward up to 2,000 euros. And here's the response. I got a lot of people texting me, but they were offering me sublets. They were offering me to look for an apartment for me. They were offering me, the chance of getting their apartment if their father died. Just like all of this stuff. So, I had to keep going with my tactics. I had now bum rushed through so many apartment buildings, collecting, emails after emails. I just emailed every landlord all over Schöneberg. It was hell, right? Guess how many responses I got? Zero. So I went to the Facebook groups. That was a lot of fun too. All kinds of really interesting scams. Tried that. You know, this is where I was, I was in the sublet. Now my cat was here. It was like running out of time. I had a job. I had things I needed to do. I couldn't just be walking around putting up flyers. It was also getting cold. And so I had to really think about it. Like, what the heck? Why was I having such a hard time? I really needed to apply critical thinking. I really needed to even go back to my own book and eat my own dog food. And so I did. I said, what does it say? Strategy. Strategy goes beyond the abstract nature of design into the land of critical thinking. Critical thinking is a disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. In product strategy, we apply critical thinking because we're questioning our assumptions, we're evaluating evidence, we're considering all the alternatives, we're identifying our biases, we're thinking systematically. So I needed to think that way about what was going on. Why, when I was signed up with the premium account, was I getting these notifications and already so many people had looked at them, even when I was like clicking it as fast as I could. I thought about it, like, okay, is it an inside job? Is somebody getting them before me? Like, what could it be? And then I thought about it critically, and I thought it's got to be a bot. It's got to be hacked. It's got to be some kind of bot that's in their API that's sending the real estate notifications to other people first. And once I had those terms, I was able to search Google deep into a Reddit section and find out that there was a hack, that there was a bot that I could download, which I did. It was called the Berlin bot, and I downloaded it to my phone, and then I went to sleep. And then the first thing in the morning, I woke up. 1 minute later, I got a notification. I click, yes, right into the flat, applied for it, bam, got invited to see my first viewing in Berlin. And I got the apartment. That's what it took. It took a hack, So finally, I got this apartment. Now I have a ringer people can come to. I have a mailbox like a normal people. And most excitingly is I ended up in a Dachgeschoss in Schöneberg, just like I had stayed in when I first came to Berlin. So do remember to take risks and have an open mind to experimentation. And do not forget that failing is an important part of our strategic journey. I'm going to take questions. If you like this stuff, please sign up for my course. I cover all kinds of different things in the course. It's a lot of fun for 4 weeks. And there's a nice little discount if you take it. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie, for such an insightful session. And I love the insight, especially the do's and don'ts. And I'm happy that in the end you were able to figure out a way to get an apartment. I was actually feeling happy that you got it. Uh, awesome. All right. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but for the audience, if you have any question, feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute and ask it directly. All right. Radio silence. All right. Never mind. I can start by asking a question, Jamie. One question I have is for teams that feel a constant delivery pressure. We live in a world where delivery is the top of the mind, and as a designer or a product person, I don't really get time to do discovery work. So what's one realistic way to protect time to do some proper discovery work?
Well, I mean, you need to really fight for it. I think it's, the role of a design strategist and UX strategist, I'm not seeing it, I'm not personally looking for that job anymore, but from what I know, there's less of them, if any, these days. And so part of that is that it's being swallowed up by by product owners, by product managers. They want to do the strategy. They don't want UX people to do it, but UX people, we got to fight for fight for the jobs that you have. And if you don't, want to be a product manager, then you need to learn strategy. So you have to first make sure that you're going to just do it as part of your process. And you need to show your stakeholders or your product manager that in order for you to do the most valuable work, that it's critical that you do the competitive research or the stakeholder interviews. And you don't ask permission, you do it. Because if you ask permission, Jatin, what are they going to say?
Most probably that we need this yesterday and we don't have time for
Yeah,
this.
no, they're going to say no, of course. So you don't ask. Don't ask question. Don't ask something that you're going to get a no to. Just do it, right? You might have to do it at night. You might have to do it on your own time. You might have to like do something else faster to make time for it. But if you want to do strategy, that's what it takes. You need to prove the value of the strategic process to them so they don't skip it in the future. And so at the very beginning, when I started out, I just did it. I would be on projects where the product manager is like, I know we should do it like this, and I'd be like, well, did you look how they did it? Maybe we should look at the best practices. And they're like, no, I'm following my intuition. Well, it's like, no, I'm doing, I didn't, I just avoid asking people things when I'm going to get a no answer, and when I really think something's important. And I feel like at this point, it's just it's on us to just do it as part of the process and say to them if they ask you why do you do that? Oh, that's how I think. It's just the way I do things.
That makes sense. Thank you. So I do see a couple of questions in the chat. One is from Brandon. All the steps you discussed result in multiple studies. Can you talk about the time frame for each study and overall for what you have described?
Sure. Yeah. Um, so it really depends on so many different things, like you know, how much time there really is that you have before something's delivered, but also like how big or how small scale is, are you building some features? Are you building an entire product? And then, I used to do this one workshop that was all about scoping. And basically I would say, okay, this team would have two UX designers, two this, two that, and had this many hours, and you have these many things, and here's what you're trying to solve. I want you to pick out what are the activities that are mission critical. And to me, it's about working backwards and saying, okay, if this has to be delivered, then, what is something I can't skip? What is something that like is really going to bring the most insights to the project and do that, you know
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that like it can be quite linear. Like I don't like to do stakeholder interviews unless I've done some competitive research because I want to get domain expertise, but at the same time you need to do the stakeholder interviews up front. And you need to start scheduling them. So you want to do them in tandem, the competitive research and the stakeholder interviews. And then once that's really around the problem space. And then, once you have some ideas, then you can start having these ideation sessions and work out like a couple of concepts, knock out a storyboard, then do a prototype, and then hopefully, these days you can knock out a prototype in a day and you can do, a round of 5 tests within a week. It's easy with real users, not the fake synthetic ones.
Makes sense. Thank you, Jamie. One other question I see is coming from Uma, who asks, "How does one learn critical thinking?"
God, I mean, I think it's something you get good at. It's really a process. Um, I think it helps to like learn some of these big terms like, what is systems design? What is thinking in systems? Like understanding an entire ecosystem versus understanding just a small part of it, and when we're thinking critically, it's like rationally, like when you lose your keys, right? You lost your keys, like where's my keys, man? The typical place the keys are where you really think you probably left it, right? But you go around looking around the whole house, but it's going to be in that place, and it's kind of like that, like you really have to think like, what is the most rational place, that I, you know, to be thinking about, in terms of solving a problem. And so I feel like there's probably books on critical thinking, perhaps, I don't know. But for me as a strategist, it's something I hate to say. It's like something that you can be born with. Some people are good at art. I'm extremely pragmatic and logical, but it's something that you could work at. So if it's not something that you feel like you're very good at, if you feel like you're a scattered person who thinks irrationally, well, then start thinking about ways to focus your thinking in logical ways.
Absolutely. Another question I see is from Lam, who asks, "What is probably the most common mistake you see people make while working on projects during any phase of the project?"
It's such a general question, Lamb. I mean, I don't know what to do with that. The most common mistake. Can you be more specific? Like, I don't know, designing something without thinking about it. Maybe something, I don't know. I think like going down rabbit holes. I feel like people waste huge amounts of time making something that doesn't need to be made. And it's really understanding, what is the best process for you for getting things done, and just trying to get people on the same page. I feel like in the current, I don't want to be generational about this, but these days, it's like wasting time with politics. Politics really take up a lot of the air in the room at corporations where you're just trying to appease people. And getting mad at people is a huge waste of energy and super toxic. And I feel like the California mode of being at least nice to people, even if you're going to say shit behind their back, it's like at least you need to hear people out. And so a lot of people, I feel like the biggest mistake that they make is not letting other people have their opinion, understanding it, and then figure out a way to brainwash them to think why your idea is the best idea.
Mm,
And I'm talking about like you dealing even with your manager. Like for me, a big win is getting the manager to understand, like, here's the thinking. And then before I get to the finish line, have them say, yeah, and I think it should be this. And you don't even need to show them the last screen. They finally can see what it should be based on your logic. And that's really like what it's like to I don't know. For me, it's like that's the most exciting thing with strategy is to get people to, on the same page. I mean, assuming like what I'm thinking is the right thing.
Right, right. No, absolutely listening and then figuring out what if that thing is actually something that you have thought about or not thought about makes a lot of sense. All right. Another question I see comes from Kathleen, who mentioned who says you mentioned using AI to help with competitive analysis responsibly. Tell me more about the guidelines for using AI for competitive analysis responsibly.
Yeah, I spent about an hour on that in my course. So if it's something you really want to learn to do, please take it. Um, at the highest level, it's really about triangulation, validation. It's about looking at whatever the AI spits out at you and validating it. It's about doing things one step at a time, not having it do everything in bulk. Find me my 10 competitors and tell me, who has, the most customers, la, 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 la. It's really a process of using, um, these commercial LLMs in a way, um, that you're not going to be putting something out there that's incorrect, because that's like the worst thing. You know, I feel like people, I know that we're already far enough into the world of AI that people know, like, the rate of hallucination is just off the charts. And some days it feels worse than others to me. Yeah, I use it. I live in it, but I'm like always like like asking the same thing over and over and then asking the same thing over and over in Claude and not trusting it. I feel like we should look at the LLMs as like as if we're putting our trust in Reddit. Because right, like would we trust everything that's in Reddit? Like no, obviously it's a bunch of people's opinions. Well, the LLM is scraping a ton of, if we're using a commercial LLM, it's scraping the internet. So unless we have it safely using a data set that we are provided to it and it's locked in, then we can't trust it. We have to verify everything. And sometimes
Absolutely.
it's better to just do the research manually than spend a lot of time trying to, backwards engineer whether what it spit out is correct. Going back to the critical thinking, this is our chance to really understand the problem and to attack it in a systematic way, and then use it to help us and to make things faster.
Makes sense. Thank you, Jamie. All right. Another question comes from Igor, who asked, when you deliver insights, a report, and even a presentation, and the response is something like, this looks good and is worth thinking about, but no action follows. How do you typically re-engage and move clients towards implementing your recommendations?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, it's like someone's going to have to crack their wallet at a certain point to spend more money. And so if you're working with if, I don't know if you're from the perspective of you're the product manager, you're working with the product manager and the account executive, then it's in the timeline and in the budget that you're going to move to the next phase of prototyping, or building out the product, and it can't be just like something like you're doing a piece of the strategy, in a silo, and this like over here, and then all of a sudden expect them to implement. The truth of the matter is for me, it's like I'd say 75% of the strategy work I've done wasn't implemented, and it wasn't always because that they didn't have the budget, or that they didn't believe in it. It was often because they just like, it was like they moved on and they're like, oh, that's shiny over there. We're going to do that now. They just got distracted. It just got sidelined, so make the strategy and enjoy doing it. Because I don't know, strategy's addictive to me. I love doing it. It's great when they build the thing at the end, but I don't expect that to happen. It's like if I was a filmmaker, I would make the best movie that I would could, and then I would hope at the very end that people are going to see that. But now you're entrusting it to someone else to market it. So, you can you really need to upfront, it needs to be built into your roadmap that you're going to move from strategy to implementation, and that's not up to you to just like expect to happen if it's not something, ask that question before you start. Say, when are you going to start on the next phase?
Absolutely. Focus on what's in your control. So thank you, Jamie. One quick question I have. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Just an observation from Catherine, who mentions it was so interesting that in this apartment example, you had to completely understand the full system in order to see there was a bug in it, the bot. So that was an interesting observation.
There
Anyways,
wasn't a
just
bug in the system. There was no bug. There
hmm,
was a hack from outside the system. Telegram is just like kind of like WhatsApp, but you can have code. And someone had figured out, hey, I can have this bot that's basically pinging their system and grabbing the things and sending it to you and built in this aggregate. And I had to, in my brain, come up with what is the what is the most likely reason that I'm not getting these notifications for somebody else? And it must be a hack. So what kind of hack could it be? That's like the beauty of being technologists, is that we can figure out why something's happening, if it isn't just like a badass broken web page, and I feel sad for the 99% of the people walking around outside right now in the cold without unable to find apartments, because I'm able to apply my technology background to solving my problem. Because the bot only worked for so long, and that was that. But I'm very happy now in this apartment, let me tell you.
we're glad to hear that. All right, so I think we have just 2 minutes remaining, and so I'll close this session out by just mentioning you can stay connected with us, UXPA Seattle group on Meetup. I'll share the link in the chat. We also have an email, Gmail, so you can email it to us directly at uxpaseattle@gmail.com. We have a couple of interesting events coming up. One is a Table for 12 social mixer that's coming at the uh, end of February / early March. We're still deciding on the date. And then we have a tentative portfolio review that's happening. It's a high demand event. It's happening at the end of April. But before I go, I'd be remiss not to thank our beautiful and interesting speaker. Thank you so much, Jamie,
Thank you,
for
Jaime.
your insights and giving us something to think about for the rest of the day and over the weekend as well.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.